Hi everyone, and welcome to our live event. And today we would like to talk about remote access. And when we're talking about remote access solutions, obviously remote access is on top of everybody's mind right now because people have to work remotely. However, the question is, how do we create the remote access solutions that are on-demand, scalable, and secure that can be reused after the pandemic for any other type of remote work needs? Now, when we look at remote access, everybody is trying to build emergency remote access for pandemic. However, here's one thing that you should consider. The COVID-19 pandemic is going to end. It's going to end in a month, in 6 months, maybe towards the end of the year, but it is going to end. Now, are you going to make a long-term investment into the emergent solution, or would you rather to make a smart investment into the solution that can be reusable? This is the question that business and technology executives should ask themselves when they're building remote access solutions. And before we start talking about it, I would like to ask a few things in terms of how we're going to conduct this live event. First of all, we welcome professionals from all of the fields. Those are not just technology professionals, those may be business professionals, HR, everybody is welcome. Please be patient and we will accommodate as many questions as we can during this session. And of course, ask us anything. There are no stupid questions, there are only unasked questions. So please, if you have a question, do use the chat window, ask us the question. Once we finish going through the presentation, we will go through the questions. We will address those in priority sequence. We will also ask you if you have a question about a specific slide, please ask the question, please provide us the number of slide for the question so we can address the question in the context of the slide. And if you have some questions, I would like to engage us in discussion that requires a bit more time. By all means, do so. Let's take it to one-on-one discussion. We're happy to conduct those after our session. And if you have any comments, if you can help us improve our events and presentations for the future, please do so. It's going to be welcome and appreciated. This is how we keep improving everything in our company. Again, welcome and thank you for being such a wonderful audience. Now, let's talk about the drivers for remote access. I mean, everybody says, hey, COVID pandemic, that's the driver. Well, not really. Think about this. Most of the remote access solutions were created in mid-2000 or maybe somewhere around 2010, but they're more of an older remote access solutions. And obviously with the digital transformation, with the team decentralization, and the notion of work anytime and anywhere, the companies are looking for newer remote access solutions. And I think COVID-19 is really a catalyst that is speeding up the adoption of newer and better and more secure remote access solution rather than being an actual driver. And other drivers are, of course, the cost, the real estate cost reduction. A lot of companies are trying to make some of their employees work at least 1 or 2 days from home. There are also lower costs right now for managing and secure user devices. We know that in 2010 and beyond, those costs were significant. We were talking about tens, if not hundreds of dollars per each device, which was unacceptable. Now those costs are going into the single digits. So of course, more people are adopting bring your own device and securing the user devices off-premise. And move to the cloud, again, both from the collaboration perspective, when people are adopting Office 365 or G Suite, or moving the compute to the cloud, where the applications systems are moving to the cloud together with user collaboration. It has been a success for many organizations that took that path. And therefore, that particular aspect requires a review of your remote access strategy. And we're going to talk about that as well during this presentation. So when we're looking at remote access right now, what should be the top considerations for the executives and technology people? Well, first of all, the legacy remote access solutions, they were all hardware-based. You would have a firewall or VPN concentrator, doesn't matter, some kind of device on-premise in your data center that will allow X number of users to access the resources. If the concurrent capacity reached beyond that X, you probably would need another hardware device. Now, right now, with every option on the table, there is no real justification for cost of ownership of a hardware solution. Moreover, what we've seen with the COVID-19 situation, there are logistic risks. There is logistic breakdown in emergency situations where the hardware, in case of a failure or in case of additional scalability requirements, cannot be delivered on time. So that's one of the things that you need to consider. If you have a hardware-based solution, you probably need to be thinking, how do I move into the hardware-free solution? Other things that you have to look at in your organization. What's your current cloud adoption? I mean, is it just collaboration? Are you just thinking of moving into the collaboration into the cloud? Or perhaps you're already adopting cloud for your compute and your applications and data analytics needs. Just make sure that you make it consistent in terms of the cloud vendors, in terms of the platform, and make it easier to manage. One of the things that people miss a lot as they think of remote access solutions, and this has been an ongoing discussion in the last couple of weeks among many companies, it's user provisioning. I mean, creating a remote access solution is easy. However, how do you consistently enable users on that remote access solution? That's a very big consideration. And the consensus here is, rather than try to build something new, try to leverage something that already exists. You have your ways of managing users on-prem. You probably have a way of managing users in the cloud. Try to see if you can leverage those rather than creating a new way of managing, provisioning, and securing users. This is going to save you a lot of time and money. Bring your own device. We've talked how securing your own devices, securing users' own devices have been a big issue mainly because of the cost, but also because of complexity of doing so. Both cost and complexity has decreased. However, you're still facing certain costs and certain effort in doing so. So one of the things that you have to consider when you're providing users with remote access is, are you going to let them use their devices at the work device, or you're going to ask them to use their own devices just as an access terminals into an environment where you will provide them a virtual desktop capability to work remotely. And this depends on many situations. It depends obviously on your ability to secure your device, but it also depends on whether your environment is highly regulated from the compliance perspective or not. I mean, what kind of applications the users are working with, what kind of data they're working with. And depending on that, you should decide whether first, BYOD is even allowed, and second, whether you can reduce the risk to a point where users can work from their devices, or should they only use them to access a virtual environment where they are going to do the work. And of course, few things that will help you manage the costs for the solution. First of all, on-demand service. You really only need the remote access solution when your users need it. You should run it on demand. You should run it on the scaled down capacity until you need more capacity. So when you're building your new remote access solution, make sure that this is part of the requirements, that those are things that are being addressed in a new solution. And of course, the ease of management means how can you manage the solution without having a requirement for high cost expertise such as security expertise and cloud expertise. Of course, you need some of this expertise. However, how can you reduce the demand for this expertise from this solution? So let's talk a bit about the time and money. First of all, there are multiple costs that you will see in building the remote access solution. Some of them are displayed here. Those are probably your most significant costs. Now, the first one is the licensing for your remote access solution. And there are two approaches to it. You can either bring your own license or leverage on-demand license from one of the cloud providers. Now, if you're building a solution that is only going to operate for a few months, and then you're going to turn it off, by all means, on-demand licensing makes total sense. It's going to be cheaper in the short run. However, when it comes to operating such solution for a couple of years or more, bring your own license certainly makes more sense. The total cost of ownership for a solution, when you use your own license, when you purchase the license from the vendor and use it in the solution, is going to be less expensive in the long run. Client licensing, that's another cost. And client licensing is 99% an upfront cost. Luckily for us, client licensing does not cost a lot, and this is going to be probably one of the smaller costs you're going to incur. We've already talked about the importance of identity management. So depending on what you're leveraging for collaboration, what cloud you're using, and what you're doing in that cloud, you may require some additional licensing for identity management. Now, identity management licensing right now is per user per month, meaning you can leverage those licenses on demand. You can scale up and down each month depending on your workforce, depending on how many out of your workforce will require the remote access solution. Another significant cost that you will incur in the cloud is public IPs and bandwidth. This is really a pay-per-use cost. However, running public IPs all of the time is a cost that you're going to incur, and depending on your capacity and depending on how many public IPs you will need, it may run you into significant amount, such as hundreds of thousands of dollars per month. So that's why you really have to rely on things that we're going to turn next, on automation, to contain those costs. The bandwidth costs are smaller. This is basically when the users are connecting and they are either sending something to the cloud, or when the data is getting into cloud from your on-prem environment, you are going to incur this cost. Storage, a fairly small cost, but that's an ongoing cost of ownership. Whatever you're going to create in a cloud will require storage, and that storage is a permanent cost. There is little you can do to contain it other than not to load any unnecessary data or systems into the cloud. And then we're getting into the deployment. And deployment costs can vary from organization to organization, depending on size, depending on complexity, but again, it can be contained. The focus when you look at the deployment cost is, first of all, if you contain the identity provision and management costs, you will contain a lot of other costs as well. If you can automate a lot of things, then again, you will further contain costs, not only for deployment, but for the total solution ongoing support. And this is why scaling and on-demand are important, because those are the cost reduction factors for your solution. So what are the automation techniques that we can use for cost saving for your remote access solution? Well, first, when you bring systems up in a cloud, when you configure them, when you bring additional components, you want to do it in fast and repeatable way. You certainly don't want to do it manually anywhere outside of your lab or test environment where you're going to test the solution first before making it available to users. And this brings us into the first automation technique, which is an orchestration of your cloud components. Pretty much everything that you're going to do for remote access solution in the cloud can be orchestrated. The deployment can be fully automated to a point where a full deployment of a new production environment is going to take you literally an hour. And when we're talking about hour, we're talking about mostly waiting on cloud provider to execute the request that you're going to send. Lift and shift, that's another automation strategy. You already have some of your configuration for remote access on-prem, and you may want to take that configuration and you may want to move it to the cloud, and you want to do it in an automated way. And this is what lift and shift is. You can take portions of configurations from your devices, such as firewalls, from your other security devices, from your identity management and provision systems, and move them seamlessly into the cloud. Once you have a solution up and running, then obviously you want to start automating further. First of all, any event-based automation will help you to provision and configure additional components based on events, such as new access requests, such as certain availability events in the system. Scaling automation will help you to provision additional components based on system utilization, based on any capacity indicators for your solution. And this is where, for example, you will see a lot of users coming in simultaneously for one way or another, and your system cannot support that load. You can automatically bring additional remote access components so you can sustain that load, and again, scale it down. Once you see that the load has fallen beyond certain threshold, you want to shut down the unnecessary components. You want to remove them so you can contain your costs. And one of the things that a lot of people are talking about in the last couple of years is security automation, what we call security orchestration, automation, and response, or SOAR. And this is automated response and remediation to certain detected security events. These can be malicious events, or those can be just operational events where we really need to do something, such as, for example, we see users connecting for the first time, and we need to create specific security configurations around them. Or we see a user connecting from a certain IP that looks like out of the country, and we want to isolate this user, or perhaps kick off some kind of event that's going to force a further verification of identity, a password change, and so on. And of course, resiliency automation, even though clouds are highly resilient, there are still failures in the cloud. And from time to time, you will need to move from one availability zone in cloud to another availability zone in the cloud. And this is something that you want to do in a fully automated fashion. Therefore, you want to create automation models. All of this will help you tremendously save on cloud costs and therefore on total cost of ownership of your remote access solution. Now, as we get into our concept of what we've suggested for majority of the companies, let's talk about the two solutions that we use for our concept. And those two solutions are Microsoft Azure for the cloud and FortiGate devices and technology for remote access and security. So why are we using those? And of course, this is just an example. You can use any other cloud providers, any other security technologies. But the reason why we think those are the best fit are, well, for Microsoft, you already have a lot of organizations that have undergone through Office 365 migration. As a part of this migration, they are leveraging Azure Identity and Access Manager, such as Azure Active Directory and Azure MFA. And we see, as we said, a lot of benefits in continuing using existing identity management and identity provision systems rather than using something new. Therefore, we see Azure is one of the best fitting cloud technologies for this. And again, there are a lot of other benefits. For example, as we synchronize the identities between the on-prem Active Directory and Azure Active Directory in the cloud, there are also additional extensibility of on-premise identity through Azure Active Directory directory services. You also have a very good solution for Windows Virtual Desktop, where you can provision both Windows 10 and Windows 7. Yes, Windows 7 with a full support for the virtual machines that your users can leverage for their remote access work. And it also has a decent privileged identity protection through Microsoft Azure Active Directory services, although it does require a higher level of licensing. But this is where you can automate some of the privileged identity management workflows, and this is where you can further automate for you not to use the privileged identity credentials, but rather using other ways of authenticating for the automation purposes. Again, why we're using Fortinet? Well, we found that among a lot of security vendors, Fortinet probably has one of the easiest ways to lift and shift configuration between cloud and on-premise systems. So that's a huge benefit. This is saving a lot of time and money for the clients. But also, they have a desktop client with good protection capabilities. There is a further protection available in case you need to secure the user devices even more through FortiEDR. There is also a way from Fortinet to protect an entire employee Wi-Fi through giving the employee a Forti access point and then doing a remote provisioning and management of the security on that Forti access point for employee home Wi-Fi, as well as monitoring anything for malicious activity, malware, and so on and so forth. And we've also seen a decent automation capabilities coming with the base product. Of course, you can get even further automation capabilities through the commercial product that Fortinet also has. However, for a lot of things, pretty much for anything that you're going to do for remote access security automation, you can use the base product and base product capabilities. And again, the thing that we've seen, while a lot of vendors trying to lock down their solution, trying to lock down customer into using their own tools, Fortinet is wide open. You can use the non-security specific tools for orchestration and automation. You can use Ansible, you can use Terraform. All of those tools work quite well with Fortinet technologies. So let's look at how we can put all of this together. Now, in a traditional scenario where user is working in the office, we do have a user that is accessing on-prem applications, and most likely the user is authenticating into Active Directory to access those applications. We also have an on-prem Fortinet or any other security device. Now, in many situations, user will start leveraging Office 365. And when the organization starts leveraging Office 365, in most of the cases, they will start synchronizing their on-prem identities into the cloud from Active Directory into Azure Active Directory. And when user authenticates to Office 365, doesn't matter when they access it on-prem or remotely, they will leverage the identities that were synced into Azure Active Directory, and then they will use Azure multi-factor authentication as a secure way to reduce the risk of credential theft and business account compromise. Now, if something happens, for example, as we have right now with the lockdown during pandemic, user is working from home. Now, user can access Office 365 clearly from anywhere, and they are going to leverage same identity provision, same multi-factor authentication. Nothing really needs to happen here. You don't really need a remote access solution for this particular component. You can limit in terms of how user can use the Office 365 applications, how user can save data from Office 365 application on user devices. And for this, you do not need anything other than Microsoft native solutions. But what happens if user needs to access applications that you have on-premise? Well, in this particular situation, like we said, we're not going to use on-premise hardware because it's not scalable, and you need something where you can contain the costs, and you don't really want to spend more money on the hardware. We're going to bring up a FortiGate on Azure, and we have two choices of how we're going to use the remote access. We can either leverage Windows virtual desktops, and this is going to be a more secure way where user will only use its own device as an access terminal, but the real work is going to happen here in Windows virtual desktop. Or we can actually allow user, if the risk is low and you can secure user device completely, into on-prem to access application 1 and 2. Now, to authenticate user for remote access, we're going to create an additional Active Directory instance in the cloud. And this instance is going to be leveraged by both Windows virtual desktops as well as Azure FortiGate to leverage both identities that you have on-premise, but also to leverage the Azure multi-factor authentication, same one that you're using hopefully for Office 365, together with the user credentials to authenticate into remote access. We're going to create a secure remote tunnel because we will need this tunnel to route user requests from cloud into the on-prem. However, we will not allow a direct access from user home to on-prem. Everything is going to go through Azure security device, Azure FortiGate. Now, as we said, the two ways of doing it is, one, user will use his or her own device with the FortiClient to access FortiGate in Microsoft Azure, authenticate using his or her credentials and Azure MFA, and then from there, the traffic will be inspected and allowed through the on-prem FortiGate into the applications. The other way is leveraging the Windows virtual desktops. In this case, we can limit user on device to be only a remote access terminal. And the real work is going to happen on the Windows virtual desktop inside Azure. This is where the data is going to be processed. This is where the applications are going to be opened. We can limit what data user can transfer from Windows virtual desktop into their own devices. We can limit what applications they can use, and so on and so forth. And in this particular situation, again, the user will leverage the Fortinet client to access the FortiGate in Azure and then authenticate using Active Directory into the Windows virtual desktop, and from there start using the on-prem applications. Now, let's talk about the on-demand provisioning. Again, this is an important aspect of how you are going to reduce the costs. So let's say we have more for users connecting to your Azure FortiGate, and they're leveraging your Windows virtual desktop. Now, obviously, Microsoft solution for Windows virtual desktop allows you to have multiple sessions to a single Windows virtual desktop instance. So you don't need to provision a new virtual desktop for every single user. However, as you hit the limit, you will need to keep provisioning those. And this is where on-demand provisioning is going to play a significant role. I have a new user that is trying to access our Windows virtual desktop environment. The user logs in into the FortiGate. Now we know that Windows virtual desktop environment is at capacity. So using this event, we're going to automate a provisioning of additional virtual desktop for user to work. And as users will start signing out, then we can actually deprovision some of those to reduce your cloud costs. Now, let's say all of a sudden we have multiple users trying to work through remote access. And we know that at this point, our Azure FortiGate may be at the capacity when they start connecting to it. So as we see this, we will use the on-demand provisioning to provision an additional Azure FortiGate, create an additional tunnel to the on-prem, and then route the new users through load balancing to connect to the new Azure FortiGate. And this way, again, do the on-demand provisioning. As the load falls down and we keep monitoring the load, once we see that the load is small enough for us to leverage less Azure FortiGate device, we can deprovision the additional devices and reduce your costs again. Now, one of the most important aspects for user security after multi-factor authentication and after user provisioning is user communication inspection. And there are two philosophies that are applied to user communication inspection. Some of the security teams would say we are going to inspect all of the user communications, regardless of whether they're going to our environment or they're going in general somewhere on the internet, because we feel this is a more secure way of doing this. Others will say, well, wait a second, we really want to use our inspection capabilities to inspect the important traffic, not everything. And that is actually a better approach. If you think about a traffic inspection, first of all, inspection is fairly costly operation for non-processing power. That means you will need more devices per number of users, and therefore you have a cost increase. But also consider this. Many applications outside of the browser can no longer be inspected because of the way SSL protocols work these days. And therefore, you really cannot do much. In fact, you are going to break some of those applications. For example, even Office 365 applications, they ask you to exclude those applications from your traffic inspection because you may break some of them. So in case you start inspecting those applications, users see a problem using those applications, so user will keep disconnecting, use the application, reconnect again. First of all, you're losing first of all, you are losing productivity. Second, during those disconnects, you also are losing visibility into the security for the user. So you don't want to do this. What you want to do is you want to inspect only traffic that is destined to your network. For everything else, there are a few things that you can do. For Office 365 and other cloud traffic, use Cloud Access Security Broker solution or native Microsoft solution. This is in the end going to be a better and a cheaper approach for you. For a lot of things, client software such as FortiClient or any other security client from other vendors is capable these days of complex inspection. That includes the web browsing inspection, that includes the anti-malware inspection, including the sandboxing for unknown threats. It can further be enhanced with the detection and response capability of EDR software. In addition, if you want to have a very secure environment, you would want users to use their devices simply as access terminals, as we talked, and then use virtual desktop in conjunction with securing both virtual desktop and the terminal, the device that users are using for remote access, using either an EDR software or Microsoft Defender ATP, which, by the way, has been, as of last month, separated from Microsoft 365 E5 subscription and is available as a separate component for you to buy. So those are the things that we consider the most important aspects of remote access solution. Remember, connectivity, providing connectivity from user's device to on-prem or to cloud environment is only a very small aspect of the problem. You need to look at containing the cost through the automation as well as scalability. You need to look at how you're going to secure user devices. You need to look at how you're going to manage and provision identities for the users. Those are as important aspects as the remote access itself. And those are the things that you need to plan ahead to enable secure, scalable, and on-demand remote access solution. Thank you very much. This was our presentation, and we now are going to move to Q&A. In case that you have any further questions, reach out to us. This is our LinkedIn profile, but also here is an email below that you can use to ask further questions on this presentation. Thank you very much again. Have a wonderful day.